Hi, everyone.
No. Hi everyone, and
Uh,
gonna necktie ni Mr. Mercado today.
I mean, it's real.
It's
It's true. It happens to be true.
and if you believe it to be true, then you
Then,
know.
yeah, and then that is the okay. Everyone, thank you for coming to our talk.
Thank you, guys. Oh, no, we started this off very happy, but there's
Mhm.
like one reason behind this sudden ligalig, this sudden joy. I
Mm.
think it comes hand in hand with our topic for today.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
what are we what are we talking about?
freedom from the bonds of
We-
freedom of the bonds of a regular checking schedule, which means
Mhm.
that it's graduation season.
So it's a season of lasts, or it's a season of closures. Wow, ganun. Ganung level tayo ngayon.
Okay, yung closure. But I might not yet be ready because there are some things that we have to talk about before
Yeah.
graduating from this topic. Oh my god, the puns are not gonna end today.
Diba? They are about to come and they're not going to be stopped.
Yeah. But before everything, we do want to welcome you back to.
paTOK!
Thank you. Okay, I'm your usual co-host, Mr. Gina Regala of IB Language and Literature and Theory of Knowledge, and he is.
And I happen to be Geoff Mercado, who teaches psychology and theory of knowledge as well. The current co-host to Miss Jika Regala.
Wow, I love the sudden turn of phrase there. O,
Diba?
sige. We're gonna get into the topic now because yeah, guys, we're posting this I believe on the 30th or the 31st, and
Mhm.
we just wanna, yun nga, celebrate this momentous event that happens on an annual basis. Just because it happens yearly doesn't mean that we won't celebrate it, or in this case, since we're in paTOK, that we're going to um not elaborate on phenomena or questions that are related to it. So, before we begin, usapang grad muna. O, we'll talk about graduations.
Yeah.
Kailan tayo graduate? Hala,
Oh, okay. Which one? The high school one or the MA one or the college?
the most meaningful one. Go ahead, Mr. Mercado. What year was your most meaningful graduation?
Most meaningful graduation. Huh, that's tough. Well, I have two.
Sige, go.
Sige. One was back in
Signs of aging. You don't
2018.
know anymore. 2018.
Uh,
20.
for, yeah, because that was when I finally received my degree in a master's in psychology, in social psychology, and the other one that's equally meaningful was the one in 2011 when
Mm.
I graduated from my undergrad course in psychology.
Oh, okay.
Ikaw, how about you, Miss Regala? Which graduation events were the most meaningful for you?
The most meaningful one was. Can I talk about two? Kasi
Okay.
my first one was one that never happened. It's simply, you know how other schools, when you go to them and you're like kinder, you graduate into going into grade one. I never had that. So bitter ako about that.
Talaga.
Some people graduate like preschool and then elementary. I didn't have that. I don't know why. Maybe it wasn't just in the school that I went to. So
Mm.
it's meaningful because it's non-existent, and I've always wanted it because like my classmates,
Okay.
like between that old school where I did preschool and like 2 years of elementary, and then my school right after, everyone had pictures.
Mm.
Everyone had pictures and I didn't. So I felt like I skipped out on something
Mm.
early on in life. And like, you know how that's kind of affirming pa, especially when you're super young, maybe it's developmentally relevant where you get the affirmation
Oh yeah.
you've done something, or like you're moving forward to something else.
Mm.
So that's why that absent graduation is meaningful to me. But the most recent one is the more meaningful one, I think, because it actually happened. I graduated in the same year as you for our MA. Dear audience, Mr. Mercado and I went through 2 years of
Education.
thesis hell.
Oh yeah, we were on the same boat. We happened to be, I think, first time class advisors going through
Yeah, we had practically
writing
the
our
same
theses.
situation. Yeah. So we were class advisors for cohort seven.
Mm-mm.
Seven, yeah. And we were also both at the same time taking our masteral thesis because our residency was going to expire. So
Yes, we were overstaying.
we were overstaying our welcome. So
Mm,
no matter how it took a really long time, and it was just a very arduous journey to get to that 2018 graduation. And unlike
yes.
you, um I actually went to I graduated 2018, I think. Yeah, 2018 summer. You
Mm,
graduated 2018 second semester.
yes, yes.
So you still got to go to the ceremony,
I
and
did.
I had to go to the ceremony the year after.
Yes, yes.
So honestly, the freedom of 2018 was exhilarating. It's like I don't know how many years was I in school. That was 2013 all the way to 2018. Oh,
Mhm. It's a
all of
long
that is
time.
just lifted off of my shoulders. It's like after this year, I can do anything.
Yeah.
And like after that year, I've just been waiting for the next thing to happen. Because
Yeah.
I think that to me, the whole graduation thing has been about moving on.
Mhm.
It's like honestly, like right now, since I graduated in 2018 and things have been pretty much upended because of the pandemic, I know that I've completed something, but I am just waiting for the next thing to complete. So
Right,
to
right,
me,
right.
graduation is really all about completing
Mhm.
something. But I'm not sure if you share that opinion.
Well, in my case, graduation is not just a closure of things, or not just a signal that you can now do everything else that you were putting on hold because you were focusing on other things. For me, instead, but graduation is a form of validation that the that I mean, imagine the last few years you spent working on achieving a particular goal, and now you have it. Now that you have completed, now that you finally have ticked off all that needed to be done, and it wouldn't have been ticked off if you weren't submitting things of a particular quality. So for me, a graduation is that time when I was told I was enough. That my effort, the the investment I have made was enough. And that for me is exactly what graduation is. That I have reached a threshold,
Mm.
satisfied the expectations and the requirements, and now I can rest easy knowing that I am enough.
I love it. Suddenly, like just now, I just thought, oh, taglines. Graduation for me is like when graduation, you complete me. This yours is like graduation. Thank you for telling me that I'm enough. Or
I'm
the
enough.
love life pala. Hindi pa tayo
Love
tapos
life
dun
pala
sa
to, hindi
February
pala to.
episode.
Mm-mm.
Oh, this whole processing of our graduation experiences actually has a particular direction because we don't go into these episodes without notes. We do.
Just so you know, just so you
Just so
know.
you know, there are guiding questions because um siguro one thing that we want to ask ourselves and maybe have our audience ask themselves as well, because we assume that the audience includes our students, some teachers, and also maybe some parents. We just want to ask you or have you ask yourselves, how do you know when your knowledge is enough? Or do you know when your knowledge is already complete to signal a graduation of sorts from particular stages in life?
Yeah.
Yun. So that's our question.
Mm-mm.
So to me, it's about completion. And to Mr. Mercado, it's about
Satisfying the minimum.
ang pangit ng word choice. Being sufficient. As per
Very
the
sufficient.
rubric, okay, adequate or sufficient. Moderate, diba?
Moderate, moderation.
These are
Okay.
the different signals of any rubric in the IB, diba? If you're at more than 3, sorry, if you're at like 4 or 5, depende.
Yeah.
Ganun. But yeah, so let's get into it.
Yeah,
I
let's go.
start. I'm gonna be the one talking about completion. or completeness, and Mr.
Mm-hmm.
Mercado will be talking about what counts as sufficient or counts as enough
Mm.
or moderate. Like, and as you know, at this point, I've lost count of how many episodes we've had. Yay. But I am always dependent on dictionary definitions because they pretty much inform us of a general, almost universal understanding of certain terminologies. So
Yep.
when we talk about completeness, or the term complete, it's all about having all the necessary or appropriate parts. Second, it's about achieving the greatest extent or degree. It's about finishing, making, or doing something, or it's about making something whole or perfect. And when you've got those definitions, medyo nakaka-pressure siya.
Oo nga, no?
Like, it's literally in the dictionary that completion is about becoming whole or
Mm-hmm.
becoming perfect or
Mm-hmm.
becoming or achieving the greatest extent or degree.
Wow. I mean, just imagine being told by someone that you complete them. I'm like, wow, I do all of that for you.
Okay, kinilig ako kasi February episode, sorry. But I mean, just imagine pala, no, when they say that you've completed something, ang laki nung nagawa mo.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
not only have you achieved the greatest extent, so too have you created the whole, and so too, or so they say, you've achieved perfection.
Mm-mm.
But like, that doesn't seem possible. Because like, I graduated twice. Twice, three times, sorry, may high school
Nice
graduation
naman.
pala ako. Sorry. Grade seven graduation din pala ako 4 times. I've graduated 4 times. And out of all those times, I never thought that I was perfect. I reached a high extent in those
Yeah.
things. And I feel like I did create something whole, but not necessarily like whole or big
Mm-hmm.
or huge.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and like right now, looking at what I had typewritten in our show notes, I'm like, my knowledge, despite what the definition of completion is quite incomplete. And
Yeah.
it just makes me wonder about how I even got here in the first place. If I don't dub my knowledge to be complete, parang wow, my credibility is kind of upended.
Hindi naman.
Di naman, oh,
Hindi
diba? That's
naman.
why you're about to
Mm.
talk about being
That's
sufficient.
why. That's why ano, when we ask the big question, how when can we say that we have enough knowledge?
Mm.
Yes, I guess it's nice to have a complete set. It's nice to have everything in one on one plate or on one page, but oftentimes we are provided with missing links. We are provided with incomplete information, and oftentimes we have to settle with what's enough. And at least from the perspective of this podcast, when we talk about enough, it's really just satisfying the minimum, or satisfying what could be realistically expected. So maybe to provide some examples, let's say when you're trying to, I guess, solve a math problem,
Oh, no.
you know you've done enough when you've managed to go through the whole process and you arrive at the expected result.
Okay.
Okay. And I think from the definition of complete and enough, I think math is a good example of
Mm.
when you know you've done enough, when you've completed the steps, when you've
Oh,
completed the tasks. I mean parang when you have arrived at the proof, there's nothing beyond that. That there's nothing more that you can do. So in a sense, when you arrive at the proof, that's completion. In a, I guess, in a more concrete example.
mm.
But when it comes to the other, I guess, ways of knowing, or sorry, or when it comes to the other areas of knowledge, they don't have that luxury of arriving at, you know, a full extent, or arriving at a complete, or in a way irrefutable source of information for their claims. And oftentimes they have to contend with what's enough. That's why I think many AOKs, they have rules of thumb that when you, let's say, when you reach a certain threshold of information, we can therefore say that with some degree of certainty, our claims are justifiable, our claims are credible, our claims can be used. So one concrete example that I can come up with is, let's say, yung sa natural sciences,
Mm.
where they make claims out of inductive reasoning,
Uh-huh.
and because you cannot, I mean, there's just no way to look for all possible manipulation of the variables for you to see if the statement holds true. You just have to, they often have to agree that if I repeat this a number of times, and if another person at a different part of the world repeats it as well in that frequency, and we're coming up with the same results, then we can say contingently that our conclusions work for now. So I guess anyway, for the natural sciences, they actually work with enoughs, and but they're also very conscious of when this enough can change, when this particular enoughness no longer becomes enough when new data or new evidence is provided.
Ah, my tone, no, my sigh is just like, I don't know how to feel about this. Because, like, now it seems like my whole notion of, how do you call it? Parang, I've completed my master's degree, right?
Mhm.
I've completed my college degree, my high school degree, my grade school one, and they're all signals, not necessarily of perfection. They're just signals. Actually, they're not signals of perfection nor completion. They're
Mm, mm.
signals of having done enough.
Yes. and and I guess the irony here is that the more when you pursue further studies,
Mm.
uh ano yun, parang I forget the name of the curve, but people tend to be confident with the knowledge that they have, especially when the knowledge is not as deep, when the knowledge is not as in depth. Parang the more you venture into a particular topic, the more nuances you see, the more contradictions you start to see, the more uncertain actually you become with whatever claims that are being made. So when you pursue further studies, it's funny that people think that so you might you now have a diploma that says you know more than the average person. But in reality, that diploma merely says that you actually are more aware of the things that you don't know.
True. It's
And
like go into the world, ask more questions.
ask more
Go
questions,
into
and then when you finally
into
get to
the
the
stuff.
PhD, you ask an even more obscure question no one really asks, and you spend 4 or 7 years pursuing that question. Anyway, parang when it comes to, I guess, differentiate or exploring the big question, when can we say that we have enough knowledge? That actually depends a lot on the group that you're working with.
Mm.
Like for the natural sciences, they do have their own rules of thumb. Like maybe a more recent example are the vaccines.
Ah, yes, please.
Uh,
Get into it.
are they all effective? How do we know? When do we know that when do we know that we have enough data to finally show that, let's say, Sinovac is as effective as the Pfizer vaccine?
Yeah, and I was watching and like recently, and maybe we'll link it in the box or the description, but I was watching a video, I think by Vox, about talking about efficacy rates. And
Yeah.
everything really just seems contingent. And vaccines aren't, wow, we're breaking and we're breaking perceptions here. But yeah, vaccines aren't really there to like not have you contract, am I right? Not
Yeah. Yeah.
contract COVID. It's really just to stop you from getting um it's the vaccine is doing just enough, basically.
The vaccine is doing enough so that you don't get intubated, so that you don't manifest the more serious symptoms. It doesn't mean that you will not have COVID. You might actually still contract COVID, but you won't experience the symptoms that make COVID very dangerous.
Yeah, exactly. So
Mm,
like again, maybe this is a good thing to talk about right now because it's super swak. It's super
I
perfect
know.
for what we're talking about. Like when we think of vaccines, the basic understanding or the misconception is that it has to be perfect. It has to be effective to the greatest extent. It has to be whole. It has to be perfect. It has to be complete.
It has to be complete. Yes.
From A to zinc. From A to zinc. But actually, vaccines are there to do just enough to stop you from ceasing life.
Yes. It's actually doing enough to keep you alive.
Diba? So sometimes, actually, in this time, out of all of the times, is it most important to value doing enough?
I think given the school year that we just went through with all of the dramas with online learning, I think there was that emphasis that there is no need to exceed expectations because these are not normal times. These are very challenging times in fact, that if you can do what's normal, what you would normally have achieved, then that's enough. I mean, that's more than enough than that we can offer. So for everyone who made a decision this school year to just do what's enough, that's really good, because that's really the most that we could ask of you. For us, that's complete.
That's
That
true.
you managed to do enough, because yeah, again, this is the most that we can afford for the school year.
Yeah.
Anyway.
But anyway, yeah, we parang yun yung mga ano eh, pang ano yun, end of podcast messages namin. We're
Oo
getting
nga.
a bit too
We're getting
sentimental.
there.
We're gonna get there, but we're gonna go a bit technical and
Mm-mm.
TOKE again, because we're gonna talk about how enough can be circumstantial. I mean, Mr. Mercado already went into it talking about how like enough. There's a type of enough that's applicable in the natural sciences, and enough changes um, with each experiment that is repeated or
Mm-hmm.
pursued. Mathematics has a different threshold of enough, but like in a
Very
more
strict threshold.
practical sense, maybe let's talk about how enough is manifest in life.
Yeah.
Because that's the basic premise naman of graduation, right?
Mm.
When you graduate from kinder or prep into grade one, it's saying that you've done enough. But is that based on like just completing the work, or is it based on age? Is it based on developmental stages? What is it?
Well, well, if you're going to talk about, let's say, developmental stages, we do have certain milestones that we can expect from people,
Mhm.
and again, this comes from what we call a um, statistical normality, just meaning that for this particular age, at this particular cohort, people seem to exhibit, most of them seem to exhibit these behaviors, these cognitive achievements, and they become milestones for us to know if you are progressing well. Okay, so
Mm.
that's the idea behind these milestones. But it doesn't mean that if you don't reach the milestones, that you are doomed. I think that's also uh, an what do you call it? A warning that's not normally heeded by people.
True.
That just because you are delayed in terms of your milestones, just because you're delayed with, let's say, certain achievements or expectations, doesn't mean that you missed out. Although practically speaking, there are, at least from a more psychological perspective, there are certain milestones that if you do, let's say, if you do not manifest them, then we can expect you to have more difficulty later on. And usually this comes in the form of language, that
Ah.
if a child doesn't develop language at a particular age, when they're most susceptible to learning language,
Mm.
then if they learn language after that, they're going to have a significantly more difficult time than the rest of the population in terms of learning language. But it doesn't mean that they'll be mute. It doesn't mean
Yeah.
that they'll not be able to communicate. They will, just with more struggles than the usual. So parang I guess from a practical perspective, we do have milestones, we do have indicators,
Mm.
but even these indicators, they change because people are changing all the time. So that's the the psych perspective of enough and change.
Oh, and that's also the father perspective. Because remember, Mr. Mercado's
Oh
watching
yeah.
out for Yana, his baby, to start talking. I too am watching out for that because I am her ninang.
Oh
And
yeah.
I mention that every episode just to remind Mr. Mercado that I still need to give her her gift for Christmas.
Oh right, right,
Sorry.
right.
Digression. Nagparinig ako bigla.
Now it's recorded. Oh
She
man.
might
Anyway.
be she might be too developmentally advanced for the gift that I planned on giving her. December 2020,
That's all
may
right.
hinahabol ako.
That's all right. That's all right. I mean, the fact that you gave something, it's a physical manifestation of love. And for us, that's enough.
Again, that's February's podcast. Move on. Oh,
Hard to move on from that. Yes. Anyway.
hirap. O, sige. The other thing is really, another circumstance where enough can be explored is something that Mr. Mercado already got ahead of. I was actually assigned to talk about this, but yeah, he got ahead of it by way of natural sciences and mathematics. But I guess one way to look at it also is that, based on my experience in being a language and literature teacher, oh, enough is such a loose and ambiguous concept. It really is. I mean, whenever students come up to me and have a question about, like, to what extent their discussion or their analysis was good or bad, it's kind of hard to pin things down. Diba? Because within the
Yeah.
context of language and literature, in culture, oh, the expanse is wide. And enough, I like to think, is less about amount and more about variations.
Mm-hmm.
More about variations, meaning between, say, oh my god, Mr. Pradel and the other math teachers might kill me when I make this claim.
Well,
Let's say between something as simple as hindi simple. You had said a while ago that indeed mathematics has certain limits. Diba? It's about completion, it's about following certain steps, meeting that threshold, achieving a particular outcome. In English kasi, or just in any literary or cultural mode of study, the world is your oyster. So often, like in my field, it's not really about the analysis that you make necessarily. It's not about
mm-hmm.
matching up with the analysis. That's like the baseline. If you can read, say, Edgar Allan Poe and analyze characters well, or like Shakespeare and talk about his techniques, like iambic pentameter, diba? Like, you're good. That's enough. But to exceed that enough, at least in further studies, collegiate, graduate level, it becomes more difficult because you're not asked to do just enough. You're asked to vary and offer something new. And trust me, a lot of people will not appreciate or understand the thing that you're proposing. Because I remember my masteral thesis is about, oh my god, it's about horror films.
Yeah.
And the localization of, like, concepts of horror, like tanggal, sapi, and wala. And I'm pretty sure that my students will not care. Really? I mean, think about it. A lot of theses are really produced with these very highfalutin concepts that are
Yes.
often inaccessible. But they are valuable, not just because they have done the baseline enough, but rather because they attempt to form a new sense of complete. I don't know if I'm making sense right there.
We're
Because
trying to make sense of it.
it kind of makes sense. Parang the baseline is basic literary analysis. But when you offer something more than that, a novel angle, regardless of how many people acknowledge it, that new angle of analysis, it counts as knowledge. So, like, honestly, the people who have read my thesis,
Your advisor.
my advisor, my 3 readers,
Yeah.
my boyfriend who read, like, siguro the first part, or like did not read it, rather heard me ranting about it. My editor, before I had to submit it to the final committee, has like 6 people.
Mhm.
Oh, and I did one conference with like strangers, so I don't really know how many people remember that, but like I'm pretty sure that 6 to 8 people have heard my knowledge. It's valid. It's valid. As per the committee, I have graduated
Yep.
in
Yep.
flying colors with that. But that's what I'm saying. And it's hard to convince people that your knowledge, like it's hard to convince the general public. Let's go with that. Or like a
Yeah.
particular community of knowers, like say my students or people in the psychology department, for example, that my proposal of knowledge is valid. But for my community,
Mhm.
in my discipline, it is valid and it
Definitely.
does count as knowledge.
Mm.
So when we talk about like enough and complete in that sense, may may clear sense pa rin tayo that enough still applies. But completion still requires that you exceed doing just enough. Ang labo ng sinabi ko. Hindi ko alam kung clear, pero mas maganda yata yung sinabi mo. Go!
It's all right. It's all right. I guess I know. I guess for many people, they're just used to quantifying what's enough. Like for example, how do you know that you are living the life? Perhaps when you have when you can afford to choose what to eat, especially during a pandemic, or perhaps you can afford to upgrade your internet connection services. You're living a life already, or perhaps even perhaps you know that you there's enough or even more than enough when you can, despite the pandemic situation, you can still offer charity. You're
Mm,
still able to afford to help people. So parang when it comes to enough, it's easy to relate it to something that's quantifiable,
yeah.
diba?
Mine is not quantifiable.
Mm.
I'm sorry.
It's alright.
We're
Pero
doing
yeah, parang there are still many things in life that that eludes the quantifying hand,
Mhm.
but they are e- they're, that, but they're still valid and important. So much so that we often wonder, when do we know when that's enough? So, for example, when do you know you've found the right partner? Is there a
Nakaka-assess.
way? Is there a way to quantify that? If this person ticks off all of your checklist, does that mean he's the one or she's the one?
Bring your wife to the show right now.
Wala, just busy. Parang or no, or even let's say, how do you know that you're a good son or a good daughter? Is it because you're able to come up with, let's say, high grades? Is that the only metric for you to know that you're enough? Or even as a parent, how do you know that you're doing it right? Is it is it when your child has no disciplinary actions, or perhaps the child happens to sleep 8 hours a day consistently for the last 1 year? But yeah, parang there are parts of life that we have to ask the question: do we have enough? When do we know when we have enough? But oftentimes, to answer that question eludes a quantifiable way to,
Yeah.
or a measuring stick of sorts. Na yun nga, parang we still have to really wonder, when we say that we have enough, or when we say that we reached enough, what do you mean by that? Are you referring to something that can be counted, or do you have a different set of criteria that you're perhaps that you should be able to share? I don't know.
Oh gosh, a lot of intuition goes into this. Way of knowing, keyword. But
Yep.
yeah, as teachers, for example, we know when we've done well. For the most part, we do to tap into that when we know that we've done enough. Like there has to be always like, especially for subjects like art, psychology, and langlit, and especially TOK. When we're grading papers, we know for the most part, of course, for the most part, we're like 90% sure and above of the marks that we give. And we can always just say, oh, I'll mark this and then remark it to the end of eternity.
Mhm.
But by way of our experience, which by the way is not quantifiable at all, but by way of the experiences that we go through as teachers, as professionals, as quote unquote experts in the field, we know when enough and above enough or even complete has been achieved.
Mhm.
So guys, read your rubrics.
Yung pala yun.
No, but that's really helpful. That's also why, as your teachers, we want to equip you with the capacity to do that. I mean, you've noticed this ever since the start of your high school life, maybe even
Mm.
earlier, but we've actually done our part, or it's part of our job to equip you with the skills to at least intuitively have a sense of what counts as
Enough.
enough.
Yeah.
When you exceed it, when you're like close to it, when you're far off from it,
Mm-hmm.
it's actually something very practical and organic to life. We just reinforce it in the school setting. So yeah, that's good.
But I guess in the school setting, we just have to make it more concrete. We just have to make it more quantifiable so it's easy to measure. But you're going to find out later on that in life, nothing is as predictable as you've experienced in school. That sometimes you can work hard for something and still not achieve what
And
you
still not
what you
enough.
desire. Still not enough.
Yeah.
Or perhaps you would realize that the effort that you were exerting on a particular project just did not reach any meaningful fruition, and that might already indicate to you that you've done enough,
Yeah.
that that's it, it's time to move on to different projects. So the beauty with TOK is that it gives you a a really wide variety of criterion or criteria that you can use to determine for yourself what can count as enough. So we're hoping that when you, for most of you here who might be listening, when you get to college, you can already start to create your own standards of when do you know a friend is good enough, or perhaps when do you know that you've done enough to satisfy the requirements of a course, that, or maybe it's time for you to shift courses, or
Yeah.
even later on after college, you can already start to decide when do you know if pursuing further studies is good for you, or perhaps even ano ba yun, even completing the degree, is that something that that's really necessary for you, or you know it's enough for you to experience what it's like to go through college.
Oh my
Yun,
God.
parang
Much of you, please go through college.
yes,
Complete.
please go through college,
That's
but
the advice. Regardless of what he says, regardless of having Mark Zuckerberg and Bill Gates drop out, please do your
they
best to finish it.
yes, they, by the way, ano sila, they are what do you call it,
Outliers.
outliers.
Yeah.
They are not normal.
You don't compare yourself to outliers as
We
much as
Let's not compare ourselves to outliers kasi they they skew
yeah. Sanay
reality
pala
for
sa
us.
term. Sanay pala sa term. Pero
Ayun.
ayun. Actually, meron pa kami, sorry, English.
Wala.
We have one more part of like the technical stuff that we could talk about, but I feel like, yeah, we've covered quite a lot already. The point that really that we want to forward is that knowing enough could actually be a push for you to look for more. Did that make sense? Always in the attempt to achieve completion,
Yeah,
regardless
yeah.
of completion's high improbability. Diba? Because there's no hard, like, the baseline is really knowing what counts as enough, eh. Because only
Mm.
in knowing what is enough can you move forward, or can you move toward that baseline. We hope that this is encouraging, because yun nga, with more knowledge comes greater responsibility, but also greater social mobility. So, biglang woke tayo.
Yeah. Woke pala tayo.
Yeah. But yeah,
Mm.
guys, take those risks. Don't like meet enough, but do your
Mm.
best. I think that's like one of the last things I want to say as your teacher na rin.
Mm.
Meet the baseline, meet enough, but always
Mm.
strive for completion, regardless of
Yes. That's the I think that's a skill nowadays, to be able to complete something, because lately, I mean, with there are many distractions. There seem to always be better alternatives for us to do things, and we often leave things incomplete. We often leave things hanging, not enough, and these pile up, and then you have an art a gallery of all the things you never completed. So we would there is a sense of pride that
yeah.
you can hold on to when you complete things. And I think for most of you who have completed the requirements for Savior School, you do feel that pride that despite the challenge, despite the adversities, you pushed through. You you exerted enough effort to complete the
Yeah.
requirements, and that's a good thing, because I mean, just imagine, let's say you've booked food. Let's say milk tea.
Where is this going?
Book kayo ng milk tea, for example. Tapos, alam mo yun, nasa app nyo na. Ay, sorry. Nasa app nyo na. Tapos parating na siya. Tapos biglang nawala. Di ba? Parang nawala yung driver. Tapos, you can't contact him anymore. For all you know, ninakaw na pa rin milk tea nyo. Ano yung, sorry. Cut this out, okay? I was
Cut this out. This is beautiful.
cut this out.
You're trying to make a point that someone got left hanging that was sick
Yes.
because of your milk tea. So make it out of this. You started this. Ituloy mo siya.
Hindi. Okay na. You know. So again, guys, don't leave people hanging.
I'm sorry. We're also really happy because the school year is ending. And honestly, we're just really proud of all of you. You didn't leave us hanging. Oh, I mean, para kayong milk tea
Yes.
namin na hindi
Na dumating.
hindi nag-disappear into thin air yung driver as per Mr. Mercado's metaphor.
I'm sorry.
But
It's been a long day.
it's one of our last days of official work. But yeah, we just want to say really that we're proud of you. It's graduation season. And we wanted to talk about this particular topic because we want to reassure you that all of you have done enough. That all of you have done enough, and this is just by the standard of what is enough for us in Savior. But there's another standard that you also have to consider, and that's your own personal standard. Kasi nga, graduating signals a lot of things. It signals, yun nga, yung akin, completion for Savior, for Savior School, for Mr. Mercado. It's about having done enough. It's about being told that you were enough. But moving forward, because you are now grade 12s, practically adults, we're passing the baton on to you. Baka it's time to start measuring enough or considering the measurement of enough on your own parameters as well.
I think we've already tickled your mind for the last 2 years. So it might already be stimulated enough to create its own criteria, and you can find comfort in that whatever criterion you come up with, it went through a good amount of process.
You essentially told them, gumawa kayo ng sarili niyong standards.
You know what? I mean, wait. Let me rephrase that. I mean, not that you create your own standards out of thin air. We are confident that these standards will come from a place of critical thinking. It comes from a place of considering the community that you're in, the people that you serve. Na we can trust that you are going to make good decisions.
Mhm.
And if you do that, you've done enough.
Sana kiligin din yung grade 12 that they hear this. Like, dapat lagay ko sa description, please go all the way to the end. Ito yung timestamp kasi this is a message for the 12th graders as well. But yeah, that's really it. This episode's for the 12th graders mostly, and mainly their parents and their teachers. But yeah, thanks so much for spending time with us. I'm not really sure how long this is gonna be, but yeah, we're gonna keep post everything here. Mr. Mercado, last message?
I'm good. Thank you,
You're
gentlemen.
good. Okay, thank you guys. Yun
Thank
na.
you, guys.
Bye guys. In the next episode, meron pa kami
The next episode.
Bye!